Ball X Pit might look pretty straightforward at first glance, but once you dive in, you quickly realize it's a roguelite that really tests how well you understand its systems. Winning isn't just about reflexes, it's about finding those perfect ball evolution combos and matching them with characters that actually complement your playstyle. And just when you think you've got things figured out, the game throws you a curveball, especially when it comes to the main bosses. One of the most interesting parts is how uneven the boss difficulty can be. Some final area bosses will feel surprisingly manageable, while others, yes, looking at you Skeleton King, can feel like hitting a brick wall on your first run. But that's part of the charm. If your first encounter was rough, don't get discouraged. Easier bosses come along later, giving you room to experiment, grow your roster, and slowly build the confidence you need to take on the toughest main bosses Ball X Pit has to offer. I'm quickly moving on to the video. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. Let's talk about one of the weirdest main bosses in Ball X Pit, the Shroom Swarm. At first glance, it barely feels like a boss fight at all. Instead of one big enemy, you are facing a whole group that shares a single health bar, which is a very clear nod to the Deacons of the Deep from Dark Souls 3. And yes, if you blink at the wrong moment, you can actually miss how fast this fight goes. We have seen runs where the health bar barely finishes sliding onto the screen before it is already gone. If you are running a baby ball focused build, things can get absolutely ridiculous here. Characters like the Flagellant or the Cohabitants can stack so much early damage that the Shroom Swarm simply melts. We were honestly surprised the first time it happened, but with the right setup, you can delete this boss almost instantly. It is one of those fights that really shows how powerful certain synergies in Ball X Pit can be when everything lines up just right. That said, the Shroom Swarm is not completely harmless. The real issue is the chaos. Regular enemies keep spawning during the fight, which can mess with your targeting and slow you down if you start hitting the wrong things. Still, this can also work in your favor. All those extra enemies create more surfaces for ball ricochets, and if you are using the rubber headband passive, that turns the entire arena into a damage playground. In the end, this boss is more of an inconvenience than a true threat, but it is a fun reminder that not every main boss in Ball X Pit is about raw difficulty. The Dragon Prince is one of those bosses that sounds terrifying on paper. I mean, just look at the name and the location. The Smoldering X Depths does not exactly inspire confidence. You would expect a long, brutal fight full of punishment, but in reality, this boss ends up being way less threatening than its title suggests. Much like the Shroom Swarm, its relatively low health points make it a prime target for fast clears, especially once you understand how and where it likes to move. Once you fight the Dragon Prince a second or third time, the encounter almost plays itself. The smaller enemies that spawn alongside it unintentionally work in your favor, acting like perfect bumpers that help redirect your shots exactly where you want them to go. On top of that, the dragon's long body and predictable positioning leave it exposed from multiple angles. Whether you are hitting it from the left or the right, it almost always feels like your shots are guaranteed to connect. The fight can still look chaotic, especially when the Dragon Prince starts throwing out its attacks, but this is one of those moments where aggression pays off. Instead of panicking or trying to dodge too much, focusing purely on damage usually ends the fight before things spiral out of control. In the end, the Dragon Prince feels less like a true endurance test and more like a satisfying damage check, rewarding players who understand positioning and are not afraid to stay on the offensive. The Twisted Serpent is a bit different compared to other main bosses in Ball X Pit, mainly because this fight is all about phases. Depending on how deep you are into the Liminal X Desert, the Serpent will have multiple coiled layers, and each one needs to be knocked out before you can move on to the next. The early phases can feel annoying rather than dangerous, but the good news is that most of its attacks are fairly easy to dodge if staying alive is your main focus. Because the Serpent's body takes up so much space on the screen, precision is not really the name of the game here. You do not need perfect aim to make progress in this fight. As long as you keep yourself safe and keep your shots bouncing, you will slowly peel away those layers. It is one of those encounters where positioning and survival matter far more than squeezing out maximum damage. Things get more intense once you reach the final layer. At that point, the Twisted Serpent starts firing long, wide lasers straight from its mouth, and those can put you in serious trouble very quickly. On top of that, the poison effects in this area are especially frustrating, since your health keeps ticking down after the hit. Having a healing ball or a healing passive makes a massive difference here, turning a stressful fight into a much more manageable one. The Skeleton King is a strange first impression for a main boss in Ball X Pit. You would expect the opening boss to be a complete pushover, but this fight quickly proves otherwise. On paper, it is a simple encounter, yet as your first real boss, it throws you straight into the deep end. At that point in the game, you do not really know what to expect from boss mechanics, and that uncertainty alone makes the fight feel tougher than it probably should. Your very first attempt against the Skeleton King is almost guaranteed to be challenging. You have limited upgrades, a small character roster, and very little room for experimentation with builds. Every mistake feels costly, and the boss does a good job of testing whether you understand basic movement and survival. What makes it worse is that the difficulty does not completely disappear later on, even after you have spent more time with the game. Coming back with stronger characters and nearly maxed out scaling, the Skeleton King can still be surprisingly annoying. The real issue is precision. You need to consistently hit its crown while dodging a constant stream of purple arrows flying across the arena. Baby ball-focused builds can make the aiming part much easier, but even then, it usually takes a while to slowly chip away at its health. It is a reminder that this boss is less about raw damage and more about control and patience. The Icebound Queen is one of those bosses that completely messes with your expectations. Even though you encounter it fairly early in Ball X Pit, this fight can easily stand out as one of the hardest in the entire game. The main reason for that difficulty is the set of 4 rotating ice walls that constantly block your shots, turning what should be clean hits into frustrating bounces that never quite reach the boss. If it were not for this one mechanic, the Icebound Queen would be an uncontested nightmare. Those rotating walls slow the fight down, limit your damage, and force you to play around positioning more than almost any other early boss. On bad attempts, it can feel like you are doing everything right and still making no progress, simply because your balls keep getting deflected at the worst possible angles. That said, the ice walls are a double-edged sword. With the right timing, or a bit of luck, they can actually work against the boss. The dream scenario is getting a few balls trapped between the Icebound Queen and the rotating walls, causing endless ricochets that shred her health bar in seconds. When that happens, what is usually a long and painful fight suddenly ends almost instantly, making this boss as satisfying to beat as it is frustrating to face. The moon sits at the very end of Ball X Pit as the final boss, but that position actually works against its overall difficulty. By the time you reach the vast X Void, chances are you have already poured a lot of time into upgrading your characters, refining your builds, and unlocking strong synergies. Because of that, even though this boss has a large health pool and some awkward movement patterns, it rarely feels truly overwhelming. The biggest annoyance in this fight is how tanky the moon is, combined with how it drifts around the arena. Landing consistent damage can feel slower than you would like, especially compared to earlier bosses that melt under the right conditions. Still, at this stage of the game, you are usually equipped with enough damage, survivability, and utility that the fight becomes more about endurance than execution. That balance changes if you rush to this level too early. Without proper upgrades, the moon becomes a serious problem as you are stuck slowly chipping away at its health while trying not to get overwhelmed. Even then, the fight is less about mechanical skill and more about raw damage output. In the end, the moon is a clear damage per second check, rewarding preparation and build investment rather than perfect play. Sabretooth is easily one of the most threatening bosses you can run into in Ball X Pit, and it does not really matter how far along your run is when you face it. Its speed alone sets it apart, but when you combine that with high damage and constant pressure, the fight quickly turns into a test of pure survival. From the moment it appears, Sabretooth demands your full attention and punishes even small mistakes. The attack patterns are relentless. Tracking arrows force you to keep moving. Long dash attacks can close the distance in an instant, and its massive body takes up a huge portion of the arena, leaving very little room to breathe. If you walk into this fight without reliable healing, it can end almost immediately. It is not just about having strong damage numbers either. as poor positioning or slow reactions are enough to get you wiped out. What makes Sabertooth such a memorable encounter is that it feels like the clearest skill check in the game. You need to read its movements, dodge with intent, and stay calm under pressure. Thankfully, it remains on the ground for most of the fight, which gives you constant opportunities to keep chipping away at its health. As long as you can survive the onslaught, you can always keep dealing damage, and that is what eventually turns this brutal fight in your favor. The Lord of Owls manages to steal the spotlight right near the end of Ball X Pit, and not in a good way. Sabertooth comes close, but the frustration found in the Heavenly X Gates is on a whole different level. This fight earns its reputation by combining two of the most irritating mechanics in the game: dense enemy clusters and a boss that spends way too much time flying safely out of reach. The core issue is simple. You cannot reliably damage the Lord of Owls unless it decides to descend closer to the ground. Most of the fight ends up being spent dodging waves of enemies while waiting for a short damage window that may or may not come when you need it. If you manage to get lightning-based ball upgrades, things improve slightly, since those effects can still tag the boss while it is airborne. But that solution is not always available. What really pushes this fight over the edge is how much it drags on. Even with late-game builds and high damage output, you are still gated by the boss's movement patterns rather than your own power. The constant pauses where you are forced to wait before doing meaningful damage make it extremely hard to clear this boss quickly. In the end, the Lord of Owls feels less like a fair challenge and more like a battle of patience, easily earning its spot as the most annoying boss encounter in Ball X Pit. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.